Chapter 3. Performing the Basic Installation. Armand Shahriarian. Chapter 3. Performing the Basic Installation. You've made the decision, you want to install Windows Server 2022. Great! You may be wondering what's next. One of the most important things you can do to ensure a successful installation is make sure that you're meeting all the prerequisites for Windows Server 2022. By ensuring that you have the appropriate hardware to meet the needs of the operating system, you can definitely save yourself some headaches later. When you've got everything necessary to install Windows Server 2022, you're ready to go. In this chapter, I walk you through how to perform a clean install as well as an upgrade install. I also explain how to do a network install with Windows deployment services. You should know that you can't change between Server Core and Server with Desktop Experience anymore. This capability was removed in Windows Server 2016. In order to support the newer Windows 10 desktop experience on the server, rather than the older legacy desktop experience you had with Windows Server 2012 R2. If you install Server Core, and then change your mind and decide you actually want Server with desktop experience, you need to reinstall it. If you try to use the Windows Server installation media to move between Core and Desktop Experience, you won't be given the option to keep anything. Making sure you have what it takes. Microsoft publishes the prerequisites for each of its operating systems. Some of the hardware requirements are independent of which edition of Windows Server you're planning to install. Other hardware requirements vary based on whether you're installing Server with Desktop Experience or Server Core. Windows Server 2022 is available only as a 64-bit operating system. There is no 32-bit version available. When you run the installer, you're presented with options for the Standard Edition or Data Center Edition. At the same time, you choose whether you want to install Server Core or Server with Desktop Experience. Where I discuss minimum requirements in this section, it's important to understand that these are the bare minimums to successfully install Windows Server 2022. You should not expect your server to perform well if you give it the specs listed here. For any real workload, your server should have faster processors, more processor cores, and more memory. So, what are the absolute bare minimums that you have to meet in order to install Windows Server 2022? Read on. Version and edition requirements. For the most part, there aren't many differences between the minimum requirements of Server Core and those of Server with Desktop Experience. The one very important exception to that is the amount of random access memory, RAM. The minimum requirement to install Server Core is 512 MB of RAM. Server with Desktop Experience needs a minimum of 2 GB of RAM. If you're installing Windows Server 2022 Standard, you should base the hardware specifications on the requirements of the workload you're intending to run. If you choose to run Windows Server 2022 Data Center, you may want to look at installing better hardware. A great example of a use case for the Data Center Edition is as a Hyper-V host. The Data Center Edition doesn't limit you in terms of how many virtual machines, VMS, you can run. Your hardware will really be the limiting factor. In this use case, you would want multiple cores and a lot of memory. Central Processing Unit. The Central Processing Unit, CPU, is the brains of the outfit. It processes instructions made by the program and/or applications. The CPU requirements for Windows Server 2022 are pretty easily met by most modern processors. 1.4 GHz 64-bit processor, considering that the operating system is an x64 system, it makes sense that the processor must also be an x64 processor. Even a cheap server with a lower-end processor should be able to meet the 1.4 GHz requirement with flying colors. Supports no execute, NX when the NX bit is enabled on certain areas of memory. The processor will not execute anything in that memory space, which can provide protection against malware. Areas protected by the NX bit usually contain things like processor instructions or data storage. Intel may refer to this technology as XD, short for Execute Disable, while AMD processors refer to it as Enhanced Virus Protection, EVP. Supports Data Execution Prevention, DEP. DEP provides additional protection against malware that may target memory locations. Supports CMPX CHG16B, LAHF/SAHF, and Prefetch W. These settings are specific to the processor, and there are multiple white papers published on the specifics. CMPX CHG16B is an instruction set supported by most modern x86-64 processors. Load A from flags, LAHF, /store A into flags, SAHF, is needed to support virtualization. Prefetch W provides improvements to performance when using AMD processors. You don't need to memorize these things, just know that these processor features can speed up execution of tasks and add some additional security features as well. Supports second-level address translation, extended page table EPT or nested page table NPT. This feature is especially important if you're planning on running Hyper-V. It improves the performance of the VMS on the system and takes some of the pressure off the hypervisor, which can, in turn, improve hypervisor performance. You may be curious how you can tell if your CPU supports these requirements. Microsoft offers a tool that is part of the sysinternals suite named CoreInfo. This tool tells you what your processor is capable of supporting. You can download CoreInfo for free from the Microsoft website, https://docs.microsoft.com. enus/sysinternals/downloads/coreinfo. The file you download is a compressed zip file, so you need to extract it first. Then launch a command prompt to run the utility. To run CoreInfo, simply type CoreInfo into the command window and you get a report of all available and unavailable features. Available features are marked with an asterisk, and unavailable features are marked with a hyphen, as shown in Figure 3:1. Figure 3:1. Running the CoreInfo utility on a Windows system. Random Access Memory. Random Access Memory, RAM, is used by the server to store things that you need to access right now and things that you may need to access in the near future. RAM is much faster than persistent storage, so a server that has lots of RAM will perform far better than a system with very little RAM. As I mention in the version An addition requirements sidebar. Earlier in this chapter, server core requires a minimum of 512 MB of RAM, while server with desktop experience requires a minimum of 2 GB of RAM. The RAM must also be error correcting code, ECC, type. Memory. ECC type memory is able to correct single-bit errors, for example, if electrical interference flips a bit in error, using the parity bit can ensure that the data in memory is corrected. Storage. There's no fancy formula or calculation here. If you want to install Windows Server 2022, you need a minimum of 32 GB of hard drive space. Remember that this is the absolute bare minimum to install the operating system. If all you have is 32 GB, you won't have room to install anything else. If you're limited on storage space, according to Microsoft, Windows Server Core is approximately 4 GB smaller than Windows Server with desktop experience. Network adapter. A server does you no good if you can't access it. The network adapter, also referred to as the network interface card, NIC, gives your server a way to talk on your network. For Windows Server 2022, your network adapter will have to support at least Gigabit Ethernet. Your network adapters may be on board, meaning that they're a part of the motherboard, or they may be on a NIC, which plugs into a PCI Express slot. Your network adapter should support the Pre-Boot Execution Environment, PXE. This is what the majority of organizations use today to image systems from a central imaging server like Windows Deployment Services or System Center Configuration Manager. DVD drive. Not all servers come with DVD drives anymore. There are so many more options for installing operating systems like booting from flash drives or booting from the network that many system administrators don't bother with DVDs. That said, if you want to install from a DVD, you need to ensure that you have a DVD drive. The drive can be internal or external. UEFI-based firmware. Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, UEFI, has replaced the traditional legacy Basic Input/Output System, BIOS, at this point. I highly recommend that you choose UEFI rather than BIOS. It'll be required if you want to use some of the advanced features like Secure Boot. Trusted Platform Module. The majority of motherboards come with a Trusted Platform Module, TPM, chip. Nowadays, if you plan on doing disk encryption with BitLocker, this is a must-have item. Monitor. It goes without saying that you need to be able to see what's going on with your server when you're installing your operating system. Windows Server 2022 requires a Super Video Graphics Array, SVGA, connection with a minimum of 1024 x 768 screen resolution. You can accomplish this by attaching a physical monitor to the server or by viewing the video stream through a KVM. KVMs allow you to use one keyboard, monitor, video, in the acronym, and mouse to administer multiple servers. The older KVMs required you to be physically on site to use the keyboard, monitor, and mouse. Modern KVMs allow you to administer your servers remotely through a web service, and they provide similar functionality to what you would get if you physically plugged in a keyboard, monitor, and mouse to your server. Keyboard and mouse. You can connect a keyboard and mouse directly to the server during imaging, or you can present them to the system via a KVM. Either way, you need a keyboard and a mouse.